Hello, welcome back to another Sunday case study. I'm Pisces Palmist, reading the hands of celebrities every Sunday. After last week's video, someone commented asking me to read the palms of P Diddy. So this one's for you, Tony T, 1680, and your sibling. So this really is the best image that I have of his hand. I've only got images of his right hand. He won't seem to show his left hand. It seems I can't find any online that are any good. And really, that kind of shows me that subconscious gesture that we're unwilling to show our left. The left hand represents the internal, shows that he has something to hide, that he's at the very least a closed book, very reserved, and in some ways is hiding a part of himself, that kind of internal and inherent secretive side, his thoughts and feelings, his insecurities. This aspect of himself he wants to keep hidden. Got this image here as far as a natural hand gesture goes, and it's quite good. And this one, it's not very good, but you can see the heart line quite nicely, as well as the fate line and the lifeline alongside it. But this is easily the best one. What I see from this image here is someone who is an analytical hand with a practical side to it. There are some distinctive features about the lines in the hands which stand out to me, and I'm going to point those out. But before I do, I'm going to talk about this person's personality, their characteristics, their inherent kind of views, and I'm going to do that through chirognomy, the hand shape and fingers, because the fingers tell us a great deal in detail about the person's psyche. The Jupiter finger represents the self, Saturn is society, and Apollo is the world around us, and Mercury is how we express ourselves, our message to the world. The thumb, in a sense, is made up of all four in some sort of sense, and it's a combination of all four. It's our temperament, our will, and our determination, our ideas, and our logic. And what I notice, firstly, I'll just point out that we see greater willpower than logic, not something you would expect to see in the hands of a musical creative. You would expect to see an equal length of both or greater logic, greater ideas. This person is someone who is much more likely to do the pushing around than to be pushed. A greater amount of willpower is often seen in the hands of bullies. It is also determination, so it's also seen in the hands of those who are incredibly ambitious. Now, I don't actually see ambition as much as I thought I would see it. We don't see an overly high headline or a headline that starts in Jupiter. Jupiter, the mount itself is on the large side, so there is something of an ambitious nature here, but that's not necessarily just ambition, it's also authority and control and domination. The lifeline as well does not wing outwards into, Neptune or Luna, as you would expect to see someone who is quite sort of bold and ambitious and courageous. So I'm just sort of getting into this because I'm trying to justify what exactly the thumb means by cross-referencing other details in the palm. But before I get ahead of myself, what I do notice is that Jupiter is basal phalanx, the third phalanx here, is on the wide side, and it is also short. It is a little bit stumpy as well. And these are the common features of someone with an inferiority complex, compensated for by womanizing sex, drugs, and or food, the kind of physical pleasures in life. These are coping devices to make up for a sense of inadequacy, which is provided by the inferiority complex. Now, the Jupiter finger leans towards the thumb. You also see it in this image here as well. It's a very natural kind of finger leaning here. This is just a sort of a natural kind of wave. It's just very unconscious. So what the palm reveals is very telling. And it does reveal a few things here. The thumb is not typically as low set. In analytical hands, normally that thumb is a bit lower set. Overall, this is an analytical hand. But the practical nature of this person as well, the um, the more material, the more inward thinking, the more selfish, I suppose, qualities about this person are exaggerated because of this. This thumb shows a stubborn nature, someone who's not as open-minded, not as generous as well, I suppose, and that's also noted by the lifeline. I mean, you can see it more here. It's not as what I was expecting to see, open. It's not coming out so much. It's not providing this person with as much as a charisma, personality, and warmth as I was expecting to see um, someone in show business have. But the finger leaning here, Jupiter leaning towards the thumb here, shows that all things Jupiter, authority, control, domination, ambition, judgment, ego, ambition, all these qualities are kind of governed and they are steered by the overall personality. And that personality is heavily driven by will and determination. Now, luckily, the thumb here is not, explosively heavy, because if it were, we'd have an explosively heavy temper. That's not to say that there isn't something of a temper here, because the way the second phalanx kind of draws itself in before, you know, um, funneling outwards to um, produce this elongated will, what it means is that I suppose the temperament here is elongated and it creates that sort of bottleneck. So it's this tension is sort of built up and has a more of a tendency to explode. So whilst this person doesn't have actually all that much of a short temper, when he does lose his temper, it is fairly explosive. But it's not the worst. Just want to kind of reiterate that. The fact that Jupiter leans towards this is really showing us that this is someone who is governed by their overall temperament, their personality. All things Jupiter, anyway. Now, Saturn, the way Saturn kind of leans towards Apollo at the tip quite sharply like this is not an altogether healthy sign. The tip of Saturn represents supernatural interests as well as the occult, but also morality and duty. Saturn is planning the inevitable time, um, the sense of right and wrong, and it is our sense of duty towards society, societal contribution. Now, when we see morality and duty kind of sharply bending in like this, it shows something of a corruption of what that means, of what duty and morality means. Pixie would like you to subscribe, by the way, wouldn't you, Pixie? She gets right in the nose. And Apollo as well does tend to kind of rely on Saturn at the tip as well. Not as sharply, not as sort of warped or crooked. And what this really shows, sorry, I'm not going to be able to edit that one out. What this really shows us is that his sense of creativity and artistic nature is heavily reliant on all things Saturn. Saturn, the reason why the fate line rises up towards this is because it's the inevitable and planning. It's our societal contribution. So what this is really saying is that this creative, artistic creativity is relying on or leaning towards his career, his sense of purpose. And Mercury as well at the tip is very sharply leaning inwards. And it's quite sudden, and it's only at the tip. If we were to see it happen steadily from the second joint, then we could say, well, this is more a sense of it's more mental and physical kind of contribution in terms of expression. You could say if this were a dynamic hand, that this was Dupuytren's contracture, possibly, or you could say that this, if this was arthritis, then you would have another reason for it. However, there is no other reason for this except for a crooked sense of expression, deception, and um, theft. Criminality is heavily associated with a crooked tip of the Mercury finger. The tip of the Mercury finger, Mercury is all things communication and expression, and learning, logic, business, science, skills, industry, commerce. But the tip of Mercury stands for persuasive abilities, communicative verbalization, our vocal capabilities, manipulative abilities, and our abilities to deceive with our voice. So the fact that this is crooked here shows that this is someone who is potentially crooked by their nature as well. The Jupiter finger as well, leaning towards the thumb. It's sort of, this domination, this control, this ambition, the ego, leaning in towards the thumb here. It's almost kind of showing how we are willing to point the finger, to delegate and control, to utilize both forefinger and thumb in this way is a very um, it's a very pushy characteristic, and it's the kind of thing you'd expect to see on the hand of a tyrant. It's rare because Jupiter generally leans towards Saturn, showing us that our sense of our self, our ego, is sheltering beneath our sense of right and wrong. However, we're seeing actually the opposite here, and that's kind of rare, and it's showing that this person's sense of self is driven by their overall personality. They're not going to be um, confined by society's rules. And that's also shown by a relatively short Saturn finger as well. So I'm going to move on a little bit now. That's enough, I think, when it comes to the chirognomy. Now, what I was not expecting to see in the hands, in terms of the chirology, that's the lines in the hands, is actually we have a very low lying heart line, which shows a greater capacity to feel, to love and be loved. And also what we see is actually a fairly curved heart line. I mean, it's not tremendous. It is something on the selfish side purely because it's really deep. It's really strong. It's heavy. It's quite thick, which shows potentially high cholesterol. But where it kind of peters out is after Saturn, it does reach in between Saturn and Jupiter. So it shows this person has actually a sense of right and wrong. They know when they are doing right and wrong. And what the heartline tends to do is reach out towards Jupiter. And this shows actually a sense of idealism. So we've gone beyond having just a sense of right and wrong. This person actually has quite an advanced, um, specific set of um, idealistic kind of, um, unwritten rules when it comes to um, love and loyalty. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting to see that. So thankfully, this person's character and everything that I've said about them so far is somewhat leavened by their capacity to feel. However, that's not all good because if there's too much feeling here and we're dominated by um, our thought, our feelings, and what our sense of self, and we're unable to um, if there is that sort of sense of a crooked sense of morality and a deception, well, that's kind of dangerous because I suppose it would mean that someone is just willing to react off of their emotions. Idealism is only good if we are aligned, if we have a strong sense of right and wrong, if we are adhering to that as well, if we have our own sense of right and wrong, if our sense of control and our sense of judgment is dominated by a self-conceited personality, and we feel very strongly in the moment, then we might feel the need to take for ourselves in the moment because that is what we feel is right and nothing else is going to guide me. What I do find quite interesting is he almost has a perfectly formed eye of Ganesh on his thumb. It's not quite there. If this were fully formed, it would perhaps show actually good karma. It would show decent, well-natured individual, kind to others, kind to animals. The wrist lines here, there's one nicely fully formed here. The second one is not so much. It sort of breaks. There's a long break in it, it seems. I could be wrong about that, but I think we have what looks like here a large gap, a large space in between. If that's the case, it's a sign of deception. What I do find interesting is that on the heart line, the lifeline, forgive me, is around about the age of, I'd say 16, maybe 15, maybe even a little bit younger actually. I'm going to say early teens, probably 13 or so, up to the age of 16. There's a really intensely traumatic um, and powerfully sort of disruptive time in this person's life. This is painful. This is a real struggle. And I think in some way, this is what's shaped this person. What's really interesting is, although we don't see a clear, refined sun line, this is sort of typical of, and I think it's that kind of that practical element coming through. There's not so many lines in the practical hand. This is overall an analytical hand, but there is this practical element to it as well. If you look closely, the sun line, it develops outside, inside of rather, this what looks like an island here on the fate line, and this island corresponds with this event here. It's at the same time, as I say, early teens. So from this awful experience this person has been through, this struggle, through great struggle, this challenge and self-development, uh, and somehow an opportunity has arisen for this person. And this is from this person has managed to somehow cultivate their success. Especially in creative industries, it is who you know. And I would have thought that this awful experience has somehow managed to align this person with meeting the right people in some way. And with his incredible persuasive, manipulative, and deceptive abilities, this person has managed to, quite selfishly and ambitiously somewhat, manage to, enable himself to get the best out of every situation and every person in it. For someone who is so successful in a creative industry, I don't actually see a creative headline. It isn't particularly a creative headline. Luna is fairly, it's well developed enough. There's a great deal of water in this plan, but it is not the kind of headline I was expecting to see something that had a greater arc, a greater curve that dips, um, more into a greater depth of Luna. I don't really see that. What I see here is a creative opportunist, but not a creative. One thing that really stands out is that at the age of, I would say, 23, I mean, where his lifeline breaks away from the headline is probably about the age of 22, maybe 20 at the earliest. Kind of hard to see, a little bit blurry. But there is this tremendous effort here, and that begins at around where this person truly begins to make a name for themselves, carve their own independence at the age of, I would say, 23. And you see this line here, and it's sort of governed by a great sense of determination and drive, which is what this person has in excess. Excess. And notice where this line is pointing towards. If you look carefully, it's pointing towards a very faint money line. It's faint, but it is there. And so this person's overall um, success is pointing towards Mercury. Mercury, as I mentioned before, it's commerce, it's industry, it's business. This person's success is in business rather than a creative industry. This is someone who has built um, a business, an empire, an industry, has worked in managing and marketing rather than, um, you know, music. And what this really represents is this person's, um, actually, it's showing where this person really strengthened their skills and made tremendous efforts and achievements in the areas I've just mentioned in life. It's essentially their big break, but not without hard work. Notice as well the headline around this time becomes more faint and kind of works alongside the lifeline. It's pointing more towards Luna at this time, which shows, that actually having to be more creative at this time. After this time, we're thinking a bit more sort of laterally, logically, pragmatically, less creatively. And if we look underneath Mercury, we can see two marriage lines, as they're so often referred to. They don't, however, necessarily mean marriage. This person has and or will fall in love two times in their life. They have maybe, I would think, had many relationships, but two great loves in their life, and one of them is yet to come. So the first is, I would put it down, late 20s, and the second is the more prominent, the more impactful and meaningful relationship in their life, and it is just around the corner for this person. Literally 55, I would say, as a guesstimation. And what you notice here, very interestingly, on the lifeline, is that at the age of around about now in this person's life, a break in a lifeline, I wouldn't classify this completely as a break. Some people would interpret this as a break. It's more of an overlap. I mean, it's almost a break. Maybe it is. It shows a potential kind of risk towards the life. Notice how the lifeline is pulling inwards. If we saw the break on the outside, moving downwards, it would show this person has moved outside of their situation. It shows a literal move away from their comfort zone, from their familiar environment. It would show quite literally a move, moving home. But what we see here is the lifeline retracting. And so this person is stepping away from the limelight at this time. So it's a potential sign of P Diddy actually going to prison, or at the very least, being cancelled, I suppose, if that makes sense, not necessarily being as successful or famous anymore. And what we also see here is on the Venus Mount at this time, or at least around this time, is something of a square on the inside of the lifeline, and this is isolation from society. On the right hand, we're looking at the practical, the material, environmental, the physical. So what we're seeing here is, if we saw it on the left, it would look like the fear of isolation from society, or in some way kind of battling with, being at odds with something, some idea of ourself. What we see here is not so much a sort of a secret as such, but um, the very real and possible physical implication of being isolated from society, either hospitalization or imprisonment, if this is indeed a square, and especially if this develops into more of one, because it's not, I wouldn't say it's complete, especially if it moves a bit closer to the lifeline. But the fact that we see it, sort of quite parallel with it, quite level with it, is quite telling. I think something that, strikes me as quite interesting about P. Diddy's hands is that for someone who is, a celebrity in a very creative industry, music, in the limelight, very famous, very successful. This is someone who has a distinctive gap between Apollo and Saturn, someone who is actually very keen to work alone, doesn't actually like being around too many people, likes their privacy, and works best alone. And as well as that, Jupiter leaning towards the thumb, the space seen between Saturn and Jupiter as well, shows us this is someone who is doing things in their own way. They have their own sense of control, as I mentioned before, kind of a sign of a tyrant. I don't necessarily think P Diddy will go to prison at this time, but there is certainly a stepping away, retracting from the limelight at this time. This is 55 on the lifeline. So I'm pretty sure that this person will kind of just sort of step back into um, living a fairly solitary life from this moment onwards. I don't think we're going to see too much more of P Diddy. So that's my reading for this week. Let me know what your thoughts are. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned from it. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.